Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? You guys still got some energy left for the next couple hours? We've had a lot of information so far today. Hopefully you're not suffering from information overload, but there's been lots of diverse stuff, so hopefully that's helped to keep it going for you. So this breakout session is titled Understanding the Aging Brain. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone at the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports for sponsoring this session. I hope that you all know that they have been working and are on the verge of coming out with our first ever Cayman Islands older persons policy. So a huge kudos to the ministry for that. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Yeah. I think this is a much-needed policy gap here in the Cayman Islands, so big thanks to the Ministry of Community Affairs for moving that forward. You want to sort of watch this space in terms of their websites and so on to see when the draft is out for consultation. But they have been working really hard and they're making awesome progress, so big thanks to them for the sponsorship of this. So as you know, we're looking at chapters of a healthy life with this conference and health care across the lifespan. So at this session, Understanding the Aging Brain, we're going to be hearing from local and international experts on a variety of topics with special focus on Alzheimer's and dementia. This has been an area of interest that's been expressed to us by previous delegates when they filled out the survey from the conference, and we want to make sure that we respond to your needs, so that's why we've added this session this year. What we're going to do with this breakout session is each of the panelists is going to make a presentation, about 15 to 20 minutes each, and after they've all spoken, then we'll open up the floor for a Q&A. So if you have a question, if you have access to a notepad, you might want to jot it down so you don't forget it when the next speaker comes up, because I am going to ask you to hold your questions until everybody has had an opportunity to speak, and then we'll have some discussion after they've all had their presentation. Again, just make sure that you've got your cell phones off or on silent for me, please. Take a quick check. Don't want to disrupt that. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the sessions are being videotaped. So if you were really hedging between this one and another session, you will have the opportunity after the conference is over. All the videos will be uploaded to the conference website, so you can watch them then. Okay. So 4 o'clock, there will be a coffee break available in the foyer. We'll see how things are going, whether we want to have an official coffee break and all go out, or whether you just want to peter out on your own and come in. We'll have to see where we're at with the discussion. So I've got 3 experts on my panel this afternoon. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today for this. We have Dr. James Hospitalis, Dr. Ramnesh D'Souza, and Mr. Tenenbaum. So first of all, we're going to hear from Dr. Hospitalis, who was our opening night speaker yesterday. I hope you all had an opportunity to hear him. It was fantastic. But today he's speaking about a slightly different topic. He's going to talk about healthy aging, which is an economic imperative in the Caribbean. He's a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago and the executive director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, or CARPHA, since February 2013. From 2006 to 2012, Dr. Hospitalis was responsible for the PAHO program for the prevention and control of chronic non-communicable diseases. He played a key role in increasing priority and resources for the NCDs, including helping to organize the CARICOM and UN summits on NCDs. He pioneered the Pan American Forum for Action on NCDs, which brings together governments, civil society, academia, and business. He has also been a champion for civil society involvement in efforts to improve health and help catalyze the formation of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. From 1998 to 2006, Dr. Hospitalis was director of the Caribbean Epidemiology Center, and he was instrumental in developing donor partnerships for HIV/AIDS prevention and a partnership with the Caribbean tourism industry to improve health, safety, and environment conditions. He was a member of the Caribbean Commission on Health and Development, which made policy recommendations in 2005 to the heads of government and named chronic diseases as a super priority for the region. As the executive director of CARPHA, he is focusing on multi-sector action, aiming to build a partnership with economic sector actors in the region to combat childhood obesity. He's also working to increase investment in public health in the region. His career has included service as an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, an epidemiologist at CARIC, and several years working in public health for the UK National Health Service. He graduated with honors in medicine from the University of the West Indies and has a Master's of Science degree in community medicine from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's also a fellow of the UK Faculty of Public Health and an accredited partnership broker with the Partnering Institute of the UK. He has published more than 60 papers and reports. So ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon he is going to talk about healthy aging, an economic imperative in the Caribbean. Please welcome Dr. James Hospitalis.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, other members of the panel. Before getting into this slide deck of slides that corresponds to the title of the talk, Healthy Aging, an Economic Imperative, I just wanted to share a couple of things more on the personal side, but connected to this session of understanding the aging brain. Last year, January, my mother passed away due to Alzheimer's. And she had had it for about 7 or 8 years and gradually went downhill before that. In her last months, she was in a home because it had just become too challenging to have her at home. There were things about the aging brain in her case that I think we still don't understand, or maybe somebody's done research on it, but I don't know some of this research. She knew pretty early on she had begun to lose her memory, so she would write down everything. She took a phone call that somebody wanted to speak to me, she would write it down so that she wouldn't forget. But you know, towards the end, when she could no longer recognize people very well, I saw something somewhere that says, if you have a sign that says, "Hi, I'm James, I'm your son," that actually reaches a part of the brain that still works. And she would recognize me. And I don't know what the research is behind that, but clearly an aging brain can recognize, in some people anyway. If you give her a baby doll, she was like hardwired. She would comb the hair, bathe the doll, feed the dolly. It was amazing. And she would enjoy doing that, even though her Alzheimer's was quite advanced. So that was like, wow, I didn't know that was possible. Even when she was quite advanced in her disease process, certain things, played certain music, and all the words would come back, and she could sing the words for that song, even though she had lost the ability to speak to us for most of the time. So there's some interesting things about the aging brain that I did not know about except through witnessing my own mom's health problem. The other thing I learned is that most of the caregivers in the home don't know anything about Alzheimer's. So our family and people at my office took up a collection and we gave it to the local Alzheimer's Society with a specific charge that they use it for developing an educational program for caregivers in homes for the elderly, because the caregivers really were clueless, or pretty clueless, about Alzheimer's. And that led to some confrontation from time to time between my family and the home. But I wanted to start off what's going to be a different left brain kind of talk about economic imperative with sharing with you some aspects of our own family situation fairly recently. So in this talk, I'm going to be touching on the reason why healthy aging is an economic imperative. Those of you who heard the talk I gave last night will see the connections. This is an overview of the talk. What is healthy aging? How the demographics of the world are changing. Some of the health trends through the life course. One of the major ones being NCDs and the mitigation of that impact, and some concluding comments. So this definition of healthy aging is a process of optimizing opportunities for health to enhance quality of life as people age. But you know, two things. One, life is a terminal condition. Once you have it, you're going to die. Only one body apparently has escaped that, was Jesus Christ. And the second is, you start aging from the time you're born. So healthy aging actually goes all the way back to the beginning. And here it is some of the key domains: physical and cognitive ability, psychological and social well-being, mental health, and quality of life. And as we get into adulthood, the underlying physiological systems preventing and delaying the onset of chronic diseases, frailty, and disability. That is the biggest thing with healthy aging. Here are some of the determinants. Not surprisingly, behavioral, like smoking, alcohol, physical activity, diet, and drugs. Environmental, socioeconomic, personal, and services provision. All things that determine healthy aging or not. If we look at the Caribbean, around the time I was born in the 50s, people not to 14 years of age made up a third of the population, and people over 60 made up about 5% of the population. And very few people in the Caribbean ever reached their 80th birthday. If you come to close to the present, the year 2000, 10% of the population in several Caribbean countries was over 60, and over 2% were over 80. And if you go forward a little bit, around the time I will probably pass away, God willing, somewhere around 2050, I'll be 90-something. I tell my wife I plan to die at 95, and I'm going to fall out of a mango tree and die. Because I love mangoes, and I love climbing trees. And if I die that way, it means I was still able enough to climb the mango tree. But by that time, a quarter of the population will be over 60, and 5% will be over the age of 80. 33% will be over the age of 60 in Barbados, Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, and 10% will be over 80 in Cuba and Barbados. Persons over 60 will greatly outnumber by almost 2 to 1 people under the age of 14. Never in the history of humankind has this been the case. So the world is changing in more ways than one, and one of them is to do with aging and the structure of our populations. And what I've just said to you is shown here graphically, the changing in the demographics between 1950, when you had a lot of young people, very few elderly folk, and through 2000, 2025 to 2050 is what I was just describing. This is it in numbers, too hard to show you. And I showed this slide last night, the change in the population pyramid, from a pyramid 50 years ago to whatever that is, like a minaret or a dome, to a skyscraper that's coming along in another 25 years or so. And that has profound implications for our economies. You see, when you think about it, the way our economies are designed, as a child, you're very dependent. When you're working age, you're paying contributions to something, your pension plan, your pension fund, the NIS. And when you're older and less able, you become a bit more dependent, and then you're drawing from that. But just think about it for a moment. If in your adult age, you're more and more sickly, hypertension, diabetes, all these problems, and people are leaving the workforce early and not paying those contributions, and the people at the base of the pyramid are a much smaller base, so there are fewer people paying contributions, you shake the whole foundation of the way our Social Security and economic planning is set up. And that makes healthy aging an economic imperative. I could stop the talk right here. And that demographic transition is advancing throughout the Caribbean. This is probably hard to see, but Cayman is there. I can't even see myself exactly what it says there, but about 12 or 13% of the population are over 65. And what are some of the threats throughout our lives that we face as we age? Well, you have infectious diseases, food and water, injuries and violence, a deep concern now in the Caribbean, environmental degradation, and the threats from chronic non-communicable diseases that are really unraveling a lot of the gains of the past. I showed this slide last night, the broad groupings of cause of death in the Caribbean, and the red bar across the middle are all the NCDs. Well, you've got to die from something. But it's to avoid having 10 years of miserable life at the end, and you're costing your family and yourself a lot of money and having a lot of suffering. That's the so-called compression of morbidity. This slide unpacks by 15 to 24, 25 to 44, and 45 to 64 what people actually die of by broad cause groups. And then you see the injuries are predominant earlier on, and then the chronic diseases become really big in 25 to 44 and older age groups. I didn't say to David when he was talking about men's health, Mother Nature actually maybe accommodates for the fact that men kill themselves so much. There are about 105 male children born for every 100 girl children, because boys seem to kill themselves more frequently. That notwithstanding, on top of that, we have these higher levels of risk among the male half of the species. Diabetes prevalent throughout our region, related to obesity, hypertension, as defined by 140/90 or greater, or currently on medication. And most of these slides have Cayman there somewhere. If you're from the Cayman, you can look and see where you fit on the scale of things. And yeah, so I'm focused on a lot here on these leading causes of morbidity and disability and premature death, the chronic NCDs. And people know this slide about the fundamental changes in the way we have lived, and the overconsumption of the world these days in terms of food, low quality food, alcohol, tobacco, fossil fuel. We consume and consume, and we're suffering as a result. And so healthy aging is about that NCD story, preventing and controlling NCDs, is central to healthy aging. Slides on risk factors, tobacco use, men and women, and Cayman is there, 20% of men, near 10% of women. Alcohol, I showed this one last night. Physical activity, these are too hard to all see. Obesity, the war we're not winning. Professor Fitzroy Henry was talking about that earlier today. And I mentioned last night, this is a challenge nobody has turned around at global level. And why is that? Well, we're taking in more calories than we are expending. If you look at energy availability and what the RDA is, we're above it. And we've been above it for some time, and much of it is due to sugar. The way the world is being fed these days has also changed. And you have more and more of these big chains that are mass-producing food and enticing us. One thing David didn't say when he put up David Greenberg earlier about why people listen to Nike and McDonald's and all these fast foods. There's a study that came out recently that the entire combined expenditure of health education in the world about diet and education is about $500 million. And the combined expenditure of these kinds of companies is $80 billion. So if you're spending 160 times more than your opposition, you're gonna lose, or you're gonna win, unless you have regulations, unless you have much tougher legislation to level the playing field a little bit. You can't win if somebody's advertising 160 times more than you are. The Economist a couple of years ago pointing out the per capita consumption of Coca-Cola and soft drinks. And in some countries now, asking a kid to drink water or a family, drink water? No, you don't drink water. The Mexicans came out last year with a slogan, Toma agua, drink water, to try to combat some of this. The economic impact is considerable. I showed this slide last night that cancer, diabetes, and hypertension in Trinidad and Tobago in a study just done this year is costing $1.2 billion US, or about 4.3% of the economy. So I'm trying to link these health problems with the economy and the need to address them so you have healthy aging and avoid an economic crash in some ways. The economic impact of NCDs among working age persons affects ability to participate in work, social and community activities, affects family life. Among senior persons, affecting the ability to participate in social and community activities. Often people are considered a burden on other family members when they have a chronic health problem. And among government and community organizations, extra resources have to be set aside to deal with this at a time when there's less and less extra resources to pay for it. Lost productivity, household poverty, we see a lot of that, and probably everyone here can think of a family where the payment for cancer, preventable cancer, or for renal kidney failure or something like that is really trapping the family. And by the time you die with your kidney failure, the whole family is relieved. And they're also impoverished because the person has borrowed money from everyone to afford the dialysis. This is a costly consequence of diabetes. Somebody is a 45-year-old man with an amputation who had someone stay home out of the family to look after him. Economic impacts on the labor market, poor or weakened health of workers or potential workers, affecting quality and performance, early retirement, affecting productivity, both from the illness but also the risk factors like being hungover on the job. That's presenteeism. Person is present but they're not functioning. And estimates in the US, elsewhere, that absenteeism and presenteeism are a significant part of the cost of dealing with NCDs. Economic impact continued. Health insurance benefit provisions and claims. Among the main causes of short and long-term claims are sickness, disability, invalidity, and early retirements. And it may also be a factor in occupational health and injury claims. How to mitigate this? The mitigation involves in controlling the modifiable risk factors, including the behavioral risks and the physiological risks, which are the intermediates that lead to the heart disease, stroke, and cancer. So it's important to understand this. Some is amenable to drug therapy if people take their medications. And we were talking about men earlier. Getting men to stay on their meds is a challenge. Men and women, actually, not just men. And then intervening further upstream with smoke-free workspaces, healthier diets, and so on will be part of the concept of 90% of people knowing their numbers, like their hypertension, their blood pressure, 90% of those being on treatment, and 90% of those having their blood pressure controlled. And that leads to 70% control at population level. We estimate approximately 700,000 deaths could be avoided per year in CARICOM through this kind of systematic approach to just the hypertension. And you avoid then the expensive complications like heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure, which is what costs money. A multidimensional approach, population-based, both primary prevention. Primary prevention is mostly about public policies in the non-health sector to change the environment. And then secondary prevention, health services, primary health care access, quality coverage. If we're talking about men and family engagement, I think one of the places for men is the workplace. And workplace health promotion programs and screening can perhaps have a lot of impact. Trying to get these slides to advance. This is hard to read if you're back in the audience there, but on the one hand, there's a need to strengthen preventive services, and the other a need for non-health institutions to support the work, and then the investment, which is my mission in the last chapter of my life, public life. Needs and capabilities of the elderly. Here you see the magnitude of need by different age groups estimated for mental health and medical, for social and financial needs. And models of balance of care, of when you need to invest in what, and levels of dependency, paying, how payment takes place, and the need for sustainable financing mechanisms, the cost benefit of different kinds of investments, the highest being on things like tobacco taxation, management with low-cost medications of hypertension, dietary salt reduction through education and work in manufacturers. In countries that don't have it, hepatitis B immunization, and secondary prevention with 3 to 4 drugs in a generic risk pill. So this is a summary of the best buys in dealing with NCDs, which supports healthy aging. life course coverage through investment in social security systems, we're working at forming a joint task force with the social security organizations in the Caribbean, and with UWI, they've been added to it to explore how this mechanism can unfold. The big insurers, Sagicor and Guardian Life, also want to get into it because they're all suffering from the same problem. They're hemorrhaging financially as a result of this preventable NCD problem. Social Security often has a lot of links with key population groups, and their experience of effective communication is one that we would like to leverage. In other words, the involvement of Social Security goes beyond the immediate financial support that they might provide. And some of the areas for consideration include starting right at the beginning, protecting the future labor force by investing in prevention of childhood obesity. This is the cover of the CARFA plan for promoting healthy weight and preventing childhood obesity. Because if we have generations starting in childhood that move through, we're really headed for a disaster. That's why we're flagging this one so strongly. National or targeted screening, workplace NCD controls, school interventions, prescription medications, and healthy living activities for retirees, and considering a new health benefit for members and beneficiaries per actuarial analysis. This is the end. This is the last slide, that healthy aging requires a life course approach. Mitigation of non-communicable diseases is an imperative to have healthy aging. The NCDs are an impediment to economic development. It requires a life course approach. And my concluding comment is what I started with. Healthy aging is an economic imperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hospitalis. That's definitely some food for thought there. I'm sure. So are you jotting down your questions? Remember, you're going to hold your questions to the end. So our next speaker is Dr. Ramnesh D'Souza. He's a consultant interventional neurologist at Health City, Cayman Islands. His areas of interest are interventional neurology and stroke, dementia, and movement disorders. He's an advisor to the Alzheimer's and Dementia Association of the Cayman Islands. At Health City, in association with the ADASI, he has organized a memory clinic where screening for dementia is done in patients over 65 years of age. He has several publications to his name, one of them being an interesting case of dementia in a male patient who was being treated as a case of dementia and then was found to have an arteriovenous malformation, which after treatment, his cognitive dysfunction improved. He's going to speak to us this afternoon, give us an overview of his work with ADASI. Please welcome Dr. D'Souza.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and panel. I'd also like to thank the Alzheimer's and Dementia Association of the Cayman Islands for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. The topic which has been given to me is Alzheimer's and dementia. So to start off with, what is dementia? Dementia is primarily a condition that affects the brain, and with time it causes a progressive decline in a person's functioning. It is a broad umbrella-like term which is used for a large group of illnesses. It might be just one illness, or it might be a mixture of illnesses. If we look at the structure of a brain, it is divided into a number of lobes. So this is a cross-sectional area of one side. So you'll have the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and also other regions such as the limbic region. Depending on which part of the brain has been affected, it would cause symptoms in the patient. For instance, if the frontal lobe has been affected, it would cause difficulties in planning, insight, learning, interpretation, and also behavioral problems. Broadly, dementia can be divided into two types. The first one would be cortical, which affects the outer layer of our brain. The most common example of this would be Alzheimer's dementia. In these patients, the difficulties are primarily with memory and language. The second type of dementia would be a subcortical dementia. This would be where the underlying structures of the brain are affected. In this, the memory loss and language difficulties are present, but less severe than what is seen in a cortical dementia. The most common cause of this would be currently nowadays would be the AIDS dementia complex, which would be dementia occurring in an HIV patient. These patients present with changes in their personality and attention span, and also their thinking tends to slow down. So, medically, how do we define dementia? Dementia would be defined as a memory impairment with one of the following: aphasia, apraxia, agnosia, or impaired executive functioning. We'll go through each of these terms and find out what they are. These deficits should also cause significant impairment in his social or occupational functioning. So the first term there was aphasia. Aphasia is primarily a language problem. Clinically, we divide aphasias into two types. They can be receptive or expressive aphasias. Receptive aphasia is something where the person is unable to comprehend what is told to him, whereas an expressive aphasia is one where the patient is unable to speak. In dementia patients, the first thing to be impaired would be comprehension. Initially, grammar would be intact, however, they would have problems with their syntax. Later on, as the dementia progresses, the language will be severely affected and the patient might even become mute. And the only thing he might be capable of doing is repeating what is told to him, which is known as echolalia. Apraxia, which is defined as a difficulty in carrying out motor activities despite having intact motor functions. What does this mean? So if you ask a patient of dementia, how would you light a matchbox? And you give it to him, he would still not be able to show it to you. This is in spite of the fact that he has no motor weakness in him. The second one would be agnosia. This would be an inability to recognize or identify objects despite an intact sensory function. So this could be tactile or visual. Tactile means if you place an object in his hands like keys, he wouldn't be able to tell you what they are. The second one would be visual, where he'll be able to see something, but he won't be able to name it. He might even be able to describe the object completely, but if you ask him what the object is, he won't be able to put a name to it. Impaired executive functioning. This basically implies that the person will have difficulty in planning, initiating, sequencing, monitoring, or stopping complex behaviors. This can occur either early or in the middle course of the dementia. And this is one of the most disabling things because it causes difficulty in activities of daily living, such as shopping, meal preparation, driving, and managing of finances. Some of the other symptoms which are associated with dementia would be agitation, aggression, sleep disturbances, depression or anxiety, impaired insight, hallucinations, delusions, which are often paranoid or persecutory. So the confusion with elderly people is what is normal, healthy aging, and what is dementia. So our brain, as the rest of our body, also ages. Our memory will not be as good as what it used to be. However, we will still be able to manage our lifestyle by coming up with strategies. So if we feel that we are having problem remembering things, we'll come up with lists when we go shopping, setting reminders for ourselves. Dementia comes in when the cognitive impairment is so much that it actually disrupts your lifestyle. So in an elderly person, what compounds the problem is that other than aging, they have other sensory impairments, such as they'll have visual loss, they'll have difficulty in hearing. Elderly people might also be anxious or depressed. This may be due to grief or loss of a sudden significant person passing away. Medication can also complicate the diagnosis of dementia. This can be either the patient may be over-medicated, under-medicated. A change of medication might also throw things out of sync. Infections such as urinary tract infections, people who have problems emptying their bladder, constipation, might also add to the confusion. Another problem with elderly people is that they're prone to delirium. Now, the difference between a delirium and a dementia is that in a delirium, it would be an acute change. A dementia would be a chronic, progressive illness which the person would be having. In a delirium, it is an acute change in the person's mental functioning. So now when we talk about dementias, the most common types which we have in order of prevalence would be Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. And there are several other rare forms of dementia, but in this list, the most common ones are the ones with the asterisks. That being said is because in every dementia, we should look for treatable causes. So you would have Kwashiorkor's dementia, which would be alcohol-related, pseudo-dementias, which might be due to vitamin deficiencies, etc. Subdural hematoma, which is a bleed in the brain, the outer part of the brain, might also present as a dementia. So what are the reversible causes of dementia? You can remember it with the mnemonic dementia itself. So drugs and delirium. If a person has been suddenly started on a new medication, etc., he can be prone to, it can present as a dementia. Emotions, you have to look if the person is depressed or if he has endocrine disorders, that would be E. M would be for metabolic disturbances, such as disturbances in the sodium level, etc. E would be for eye and ear impairments. N for nutritional disorders, such as vitamin B12 deficiencies. T for tumors, toxins, trauma to the head, etc. I for infections, not only of the brain, but can also be something like a urinary tract infection. A would be for alcohol abuse or arteriosclerosis. So what are the steps which we take when we are evaluating a patient of dementia? The first and most important step would be history. The history, it is important to establish the onset, duration, and progress. So when was the first symptom noted of the patient? How has it progressed? Whether the patient has difficulty in short-term memory or long-term memory loss. Then would be a thorough physical and neurological examinations where we would look for other signs, like signs of a stroke, signs of nutritional deficiencies, etc. Cognitive screening test, generally we would recommend that every patient above 65, whenever he comes to the physician's clinic, undergoes a routine cognitive screening test. We should rule out reversible causes as the list showed. Neuroimaging, it is recommended that every patient who has been considered as a diagnosis of dementia should undergo at least one scan. We should try and look for an etiology of the dementia. In history taking, sometimes a patient will actually give the worst history because he might not have insight that he is having memory impairment. So it is most important to get a good history from the caregiver, a spouse, if possible. Memory impairment may be evidenced by asking repeated questions, by writing lists, lost objects, etc. So when we are taking history, we ask about the memory impairment. We ask about activities of daily functioning to assess how that person's level of functioning is. So we ask if he can do simple functions such as dressing himself every day, preparing breakfast, if he's able to handle money, etc. Dementia is not just about memory impairment. It affects almost every aspect of their life. The next step would be a cognitive screening test. So the importance of cognitive screening, as I said, would be first you would establish a baseline level of functioning. It allows for objective documentation of the patient's cognition. Cognitive impairment is not often documented, and so sometimes patients are not evaluated for potentially reversible cause of the dementia. And sometimes patients would also not receive treatment for the dementia because the diagnosis would be missed. Screening test, the most common one which we use is the mini mental status examination. This is a scale which is graded from 0 to 30, where 30 is normal, and the lower down the patient goes, the more severe the dementia is. Typically, in an outpatient setting, it takes around 10 minutes to go through this MMSE, and we generally do it in all patients above 65. Other tests equally good would be the Mini-Cog or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. So now, just a brief overview on the various types of dementia. The first one, the most common, is Alzheimer's disease. Clinically, it is characterized by an insidious onset and gradual progression of cognitive decline. Presentation is usually related primarily to deficits of memory. If you look at age-related incidence, it is present in about 8% of people above the age of 85. Around half to two-thirds of the time when we are evaluating a person for the cause of dementia, the cause would be Alzheimer's. The ultimate diagnosis would be histopathological, where we would have to demonstrate plaques and tangles. So on the left side of the screen, you can see what is a healthy neuron, and on the other side would be a neuron in a person affected with Alzheimer's disease. So in the patient with Alzheimer's disease, you would have what is known as neurofibrillatory tangles. These are basically abnormal proteins which get deposited along with amyloid plaques. The biochemical basis for Alzheimer's disease is a deficiency of acetylcholine. This is basically a chemical neurotransmitter which is present in our brain. It is present in our cerebral cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and all of these structures are affected. The basal nucleus is also depleted of acetylcholine, and these neurons project from there to other parts of the brain. Genetics of Alzheimer's. In a minority of cases, Alzheimer's, there is a link to genetics where it can occur as an autosomal dominant inheritance, and it is linked to certain chromosomes. The presence of an allele, that is apoallele E4, increases the risk, especially if it is homozygous. In general, we do not do genetic testing for Alzheimer's disease unless there's a strong family incidence and of patients in a particular family having it below the age of 60. The course of Alzheimer's, it is typically an insidious onset progressive course, and typically we would lose 3 points in your cognitive scoring with each year, and from the point of diagnosis to death would be around 8 to 12 years. So the course of Alzheimer's it goes from mild to moderate to severe. In the mildest form of Alzheimer's, the MMSE would be varying between 20 to 24. The normal MMSE is 30. So between 24 to 26, we call it as minimal cognitive impairment. But when the MMSE falls between 20 to 24, it would be diagnosed as mild Alzheimer's disease. This would usually occur in the first 2 to 3 years after the diagnosis. The primary problems would be memory and visuospatial, that is, problems with the vision and orientation. There may be mild difficulty with executive functioning. In the second part, which would be moderate, the MMSE goes from 11 to 20. It is 3 to 6 years after the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is made. The aphasia, that is a language problem, and the apraxia become more pronounced. The patient has more difficulty in independently doing activities of daily living and continuously requires increased assistance for these activities. They also begin to exhibit some neuropsychiatric problems, particularly paranoia. In the third stage, which is the last stage, which is the most severe, it usually begins 6 to 10 years after the diagnosis. There's severe language disturbances, there's pronounced neuropsychiatric problems, and very late, you can see muscle rigidity, gait problems, incontinence, and difficulty in eating also. The second most common cause of dementia, which would be vascular dementia. Now, this dementia would actually come under one of those which is preventable. It is also called as Binswanger's disease or lacuna states. What happens in vascular dementia is the patient has multiple small strokes. These may clinically manifest, or only when we do an imaging we will see them. The risk factors for a vascular dementia are smoking, atrial fibrillation, diabetes, and hypertension. So if we look at this picture, it shows us exactly what the risk factors are. The patient can have micro bleeds within the brain. There can be small infarcts which occur due to patients with uncontrolled diabetes and hypertension. You can have narrowing of the carotid arteries, that is the blood vessels which supply our brain. You can also have narrowing of the blood vessels within the brain itself, which predispose the patient to have strokes. The third one would be dementia with Lewy bodies. The incidence is around 7 to 26%. Generally, in this case, you would have behavioral problems prior to memory impairment coming in. So the patients tend to come in with visual hallucinations, delirium, and even Parkinsonism-like symptoms, and the memory impairment comes in later. These patients tend to decline faster than those with Alzheimer's disease. This is just a histopathological slide of the Lewy bodies. Frontotemporal dementia, also known as Pick's disease. Again, this would present with behavioral changes before the memory impairment occurs. It presents with personality changes, disinhibition, executive dysfunction, followed by memory impairment. The age group for this is around 40 to 60 years. And this is a brain of a person with Pick's disease. So it predominantly affects what is the frontal lobe, which is the part circled there. Again, what you can see on this slide is that the frontal lobe has been affected more than the other lobes of the brain. So how do we treat dementia? Now, the most important thing when we diagnose a person is suffering from dementia, we should look if we can find any reversible causes. So typically when a patient comes in with dementia, the minimum investigations which need to be done are a complete blood count, a thyroid function, his vitamin B12, and probably a baseline scan. And based on our clinical evaluation, we can decide for higher testing also. So medically, we have a couple of drugs which can slow down the progression after dementia, but unfortunately, there is no cure for dementia. The FDA has approved a couple of these drugs. The first one is an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. So as I said earlier, the biochemical basis for Alzheimer's is a depletion of acetylcholine. So this drug acts by trying to increase the levels of acetylcholine within the brain. The second would be an NMDA agonist, which is known as memantine. It is given as an add-on with acetylcholine, and it is indicated in moderate to severe dementia. Other drugs have also been tried, such as vitamin E in high doses, but none of them have been proven to be effective in the treatment of dementia. Behavioral treatment, this should actually be initiated before we start the patient on medications. This generally consists of reassuring the patient, distraction, redirection, and changing the structure of the person's life so that he can adapt with this. You should not argue with the person. It may actually make things worse. You should provide a safe environment where the dysfunctional behavior can occur without actually causing him or her harm. Psychotherapy, it is basically a behavioral approach which can be used to reduce the frequency and severity of problematic behaviors such as aggression and socially inappropriate conduct. We should try and identify what is triggering the problematic behavior and then devise an intervention that either changes the person's environment or the caregiver's reaction to the behavior, which can be effective in treating these things. Other strategies maybe include breaking down complex tasks for the person, such as dressing, making it into simpler steps so he's able to actually be independent, reducing the amount of activity in an environment which could confuse the person and cause him to be agitated. Environmental modifications are also important. You have to modify the environment in which the person is living. Home modifications for safety include keeping away hazards such as sharp knives, dangerous chemicals, and tools which can cause harm. Child-proof latches may be used. Bed rails, bathroom safety rails can be put in as a safety measure as well. Another example is lowering the temperature of hot water, which reduces the risk of burning or disabling the stove and or other devices while other people are not in the house. Other therapies would include physical therapies to improve the mobility by teaching patients how to use canes and walkers. Aromatherapy, music therapy has also been proven as effective, as well as occupational therapy. There are a number of new remedies which are in the market which are being promoted as treatments for Alzheimer's. They can be appealing because they are supposed to be coming from natural ingredients. Using these drugs as an alternative to or in addition to a physician-prescribed therapy tends to raise legitimate concerns. That is primarily because these have not been FDA approved. They are also not being manufactured in a consistent manner. Therefore, it is advisable that no supplement should be taken without first consulting the physician or informing the doctor treating the dementia patient. So this slide is just to summarize the problem of dementia. There are over 100 different types of dementia. As I said, Alzheimer's is the most common type. 36.5 million people are living with dementia in the year 2001, it is estimated. There's one new case of dementia per 4 seconds. Prevention, so the preventable causes would be, as I said, vascular dementia, controlling risk factors such as hypertension, diabetes, obesity, smoking. The challenges currently faced is there is no treatment for dementia. $604 billion is the estimated cost. And the three main symptoms are cognitive, functional, and mood changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. D'Souza. Okay, just to let everyone just stand up and give a quick stretch. Big stretch, reach right up, really high. Wave your hands in the air. Okay, awesome. Shake it out. Okay, all right. Well done, everybody. That was your physical break. All right, so we have one more speaker before we get to the Q&A, so you can just either run out for a quick coffee or have a quick seat. If you can just hang in there for another couple minutes, we'll get through the last speaker before you disappear. They go running out the door. So our next speaker, I am extremely excited to hear from. When we were working on the older persons policy, and as I was doing some of my certification maintenance hours for my planning certification, I came across this concept of aging in place. And so I'm really excited that we have Louis Tenenbaum here to talk about it. So in 1988, he had no idea that a remodeling project helping a young paraplegic be independent in the bathroom would chart the direction of his life and his career. When he focused his remodeling company on aging in place in the early 90s, he was surprised that in-home supports are not delivered through an organized system, which pushed him to study aging, housing, and care systems, transportation, and long-term care and health costs. Over 20 years of experience working with families and individuals, designers and developers, geriatric care managers, occupational therapists, product manufacturers, community leaders, and advocates informed his white paper, Aging in Place 2.0, Rethinking Solutions to the Home Care Challenge, which was published by the MetLife Mature Market Institute. If you Google it, you will find it online. It is there, Aging in Place 2.0, and you can download it. Mr. Tenenbaum is a leading authority on aging in place, the idea that our homes are the most desirable and economical place for housing and care. This idea runs parallel with a commitment to dignity, respect, and healthy, happy older citizens in the homes of their choice. Lewis's cross-disciplinary experience leads him to embrace a systems approach to community services, including in-home providers, healthcare providers, government, not-for-profits, technology, and business. Lewis, who has 2 young adult children, lives in Washington, D.C. suburbs. He is a biker, a whitewater kayaker, a skier, and has practiced yoga for more than 30 years. I should have had you lead the stretch, I guess. Lewis enjoys many giving and spiritual communities. He loves the irony of waking up stiff and sore every morning while feeling vibrant every day. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lewis Tenenbaum.
Thank you. It is a real pleasure to be here. I wasn't whitewater kayaking today, but I did get some snorkeling in last night and this morning, and I really appreciate the environment. I don't have any slides today, and I don't usually talk about the aging brain, but what I'm going to talk about is the advantages I find in my experience working with older clients. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the transitions, because some of my clients are in families that have people experiencing different types of dementia. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the encore and how aging people are encore and advantage to our communities. About 25 years ago, I didn't think I would be talking to you about this when I decided to focus a little bit on remodeling homes for older people. I just thought I had enjoyed the work I'd done with this young man who was a paraplegic, how I helped his family be able to allow him to be independent and relieve them the pressure of making him the special person in their household. And I thought I could do the same sort of thing with older citizens. So I got involved with older people, initially in sales, really, right? Sitting down with older clients and discussing with them what their needs are, and also with the 50-plus housing industry, and talking about how older people made purchases. So the first thing we learned was that young salespeople are really frustrated when dealing with older clients because they don't immediately just come in and buy something. They don't come in and show up and buy. Maybe they come back 6 times over a year and look at the place before they buy. And the salespeople found this very frustrating. So you have to think to what they're really buying. And it's not the house they're buying. In fact, in many cases, it's the experience. So you get an older person who's more interested in what's around the house and the community, how they're going to be able to take a walk, how they're going to be able to meet up with their neighbors. It's a big picture decision. And if you think about it in terms of a cruise, it's not about the length of the boat. It's whether they're going to get it to dance on deck in the evening, right? That's the experience they're looking for. It's not really about the room you're sleeping in. And similarly, I'm staying in this incredible hotel right here. But it's really kind of about the beach out there and things like that. It's not so much about the room. That's just where I'm sleeping. So I learned right away, with respect for my clients, that people who aren't purchasing or aren't deciding may not be in denial, as some people say. They're just wise enough not to buy if what is available isn't something they need or want. And that, I think, colors my whole conversation here with you about the aging brain. So the things I determined, I used to give some marketing talks on marketing to older consumers, and the things I came up with were 5: trust, value, filter, personal growth, and repairing the world. In terms of trust, you know, can I use a BS, right? You can't BS an older client into buying something. You can't pick something out about them and impress them and compliment them and get them to buy. They're going to see right through that. So you've got to be a trustworthy person. And I think that's dealing with every person, older particularly, in terms of the relationship you have with them as a health provider or community services provider. Value, because it's not so much about being the cheapest thing as the thing that's going to last long and give a good value for their dollar. Filter, because particularly now with the internet, there is so much information out there that people are overwhelmed and overloaded. And if you can be that trusted provider who explains value to them and shows them that you understand this well enough, they trust you and you understand this well enough to guide them through the morass of information, then you're going to make your sale. Personal growth, yoga's one thing, spiritual communities are another. But the real key is that people often have behind their mind's eye something they're thinking about that's what they're really going to use this product for. So it's not to go fast, but it's to feel secure driving a new automobile. Or maybe it's a low energy automobile, low gas mileage automobile, and they're really thinking about their grandchildren and what kind of planet they're going to leave for them. So it's impossible to kind of identify this. It's not about the house, it's about the experience of the house and how it fulfills their internal goals. And you have to leave that open for them to determine. And also repairing the world. As we get older, we have more time to consider our impact on the planet, our legacy to our families. And if you can show them a product that will help them, like a Toyota Prius maybe, that makes the world a better place as they purchase it. So they get to use something brand new, smells like a new car, and yet also do something for the planet. That's the way to go in terms of sales. Now, this all came around to sort of theory when a fellow named Gene Cohn, a psychiatrist and research professor at Georgetown University, who I got to know a little bit before his untimely death at a very young age from cancer, and he spoke about the undivided brain. So Dr. Hospitale spoke about right brain, left brain. He said, I'm going to talk left brain now a little bit. And how many of you have the experience of remembering, if you have children, when they were able to hand something from their right hand to their left hand? The neurological development across the brain had occurred. And we talk about right brain, left brain, our sort of numbers brain and our art and feeling brain. But what Dr. Cohn determined was that as people get older, these brains cross. And the type of information we use to make decisions becomes more based in the full range of our experience and capability instead of one side or the other. So we are actually sifting and evaluating more information. That's why an older person might be thoughtful looking when you say something. It's not befuddlement. It's thoughtfulness. They're actually dealing with what you're telling them in terms of a whole lifetime of information. So it may be that it's not hard to make decisions, but actually decisions are less emotional because they're based more in experience and more in the experience of life, and stuff is influenced, not stuff is influencing your decision, not the desire to acquire stuff and have something like your friend has. That doesn't hold so much credence anymore. So the idea is not to buy when there is not a project you like. It's almost impossible for a salesperson to to begin a false sense of urgency, which is what salespeople typically try to do. How soon do you need to buy that? Well, I could spend a year or two. Salesman is totally disinterested, right? I was thinking about one other famous Caribbean, the writer Malcolm Gladwell from Jamaica, who in his book Outliers spoke about the 10,000 hours of experience that the Beatles had, for example, playing in Hamburg that led to their specialness, and how even Bill Gates had all this experience doing a lot of computer software programming when he was a young man. And it's this sort of experience that makes older people, better consumers. It's not that life gets easier, but now it's easier to filter out what doesn't matter and focus on what truly matters. Experience to know that so much is not consequential. Small things, let it go. And to have gratitude for what you have, and just maybe you don't need something else because life is okay just the way it is. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about digital natives versus immigrants. So I'm an immigrant, right? Operating the computer is really tough for me. And when you get with some person who knows about the computer, I'll call my son and say, I'm having a problem with my computer. And he says, did you reboot? Did you turn it off and on? Did you Google the question before you called me and wasting my time? But also, he can't solve my problem unless he sits down in front of my computer, because it's not like he actually knows the answer. He's just willing to play with the computer to find the answer. I'm afraid that the back button isn't enough. I'm going to do something and lose what capability I have, and if I've lost just a little bit, maybe that's better than goofing the whole thing up. So I think with technology, for example, the aging brain is just partly a lack of familiarity. We're just not familiar with how this sort of thing works. And yet, when the technology has value, older people seem to adapt it just as quickly as anybody else. So you see older people who find out about Uber, for example, all of a sudden they need a smartphone because they can. Is Uber here in Cayman? So anyway, it's where you call a cab with your phone and it shows right up. So all of a sudden I want a smartphone. I didn't want one before because I didn't have any particular use for it. Now I want it because I can call Uber. I was sitting with a good friend of mine a while ago, and his father, who clearly had dementia, couldn't remember very much, was bored with our conversation. How rude of him. He picked up his iPad and started rereading the New York Times. He'd read it about 4 times that day. That was okay with him. It was much better than talking to us. So he was using the technology. So what keeps us healthy in our brain? And the thing I found most interesting and most pointed out is frequent partner dancing, right? Whether you're leading or following, there's a lot going on there. You're using your brain, you're listening to the music, you're listening to the rhythm, you're holding on and feeling the nuances of the person you're dancing with, and you're responding with your body from your mind to all that information coming in. So that's kind of a symbol and a metaphor for the physical, brain coordination, social, and consistent decision-making that exercises the brain. And I know there's a lot of question about whether exercising the brain has any impact or not, but there's some evidence that people who do this type of activity are, in fact, less prone to dementia. So now, in terms of transitions and events and triggers, I think often we jump to conclusions. The senior moment is a real issue. There's no such thing as a junior moment. But young people forget their lunch. How many of us are rushing to school with our kids' lunch? Or they forgot their homework, or all those kinds of things. And we don't blame it on their age. So maybe it's the fact that these things are not so consequential to us that we forget them. Maybe I've met a lot of people, I just don't need to remember this particular person's name this time. They can reintroduce themselves, or I can ask next time I speak to them. I used to remember a lot of phone numbers. Now I give that over to my phone and let it remember all the phone numbers, and I don't have to busy my brain with that. I can pay attention to other more important things. So it's about a keener sense of internalized priorities. And it may seem absent-minded when it's really just personal and internal. So I think in some respects, and I've seen this with families, that people exaggerate the importance of these things based out of fear. Out of fear that they're not going to do a good enough job for taking care of mom or dad or Uncle Bill, or out of fear that they don't have the time or patience to take care of Uncle Jack or Aunt Sarah. So there's their fear of that personal loss of mom or dad, and that they're too busy to deal with it. And I'm not saying that there aren't really important issues here in terms of judgment, driving, walking, getting lost, and financial cues that tip us off to when something may really be wrong and you need to get to a doctor. And I know that the loss of executive function is a first sign, that when you seem to have lost a checkbook or a savings account or something like that, or you've spent some money. But then we come over to this fear side. So mom doesn't want to say she fell down because she fears you're going to send her to the nursing home or want her to move in with you, and isn't that going to be miserable for everybody involved? Or doesn't want to let you know that somebody ripped her off for painting the shutters because she gave them a check and they disappeared with it because, again, you're going to have a family problem with that. So there's a real question point there about when we jump to conclusions and when it's really important. In my experience with older clients and family members as well, my advice is to take the person where they are. You know, if they're out there in our area, if mom or dad's out there in their bathing suit in the snow, could be they're really at the beach, you know? And though it's really hard for family members to do that, my experience is if you don't try to get them to remember what just happened, but take them and enjoy the conversation with the person where they are, in their past, on an island of contentment with their memories or their imagination, join them there because the person you love really can be there. So I was at dinner with a friend of mine about a week and a half ago, my friend, his wife, and his mom, who is clearly exhibiting some dementia because she asked where I lived 8 times in the hour and a half I was with her. You know what? That was okay because I know where I live. I could just answer that question. For them, and she was absolutely charming. The evening was charming. She took us back to her time in England during the Second World War when children were sent out of the city and the family she lived with, and those memories were intact, and it was clear, and it added to the conversation. Now, they were upset. They thought I'd be bored, and in some respects, they were bored. But in fact, it was charming. So to the degree that it's possible, I suggest you take the person where they are. Now, my history is with the built environment, so I'm not going to ignore it, and some of it was already mentioned. Stoves are dangerous. There are automatic shutoffs type things available. Maybe you just eliminate use of the stove. A lot of things about controls, whether it's the air conditioning, locking the door, unlocking the door, the telephone, the television. There's all kinds of things like that which really do need attention, and I don't have great solutions to them all. There are reminder devices that can remind people to take their pills and let you know that they have taken their pills in the morning or not taken their pills so that you can call mom and say, why didn't you take your pills? It was supposed to let us know by 10 a.m. that you did so. There is the really dangerous issue of wandering and getting lost and turning up someplace else. Some of this can be helped by having, if they're not in danger to themselves, making sure that there's a way that they have information about themselves on them. And now there are even some devices that can, they're used for children, but a cell phone that can let you know where the person is at all times so you can find them. And then in the environment, there's about queuing. Queuing, which is the worst example of queuing I saw was a bedside commode with a washcloth hanging over the arm of it, and the person got up, saw the washcloth, and began washing their face, right? So it's really important that you are queuing in the right way for the information you want. That can be stickies or tape on the doors of the cabinets telling people what's inside so they don't have to keep opening and closing the doors, prioritizing, moving things out of the way or maybe even into long-term storage that aren't going to be used, maybe just one pot, one stove, one pan, things like that, or a microwave, so that fewer choices are there. If it's just what's obvious, it's a little easier to go that way. I've seen examples where people wanted someone not to use a door, and they hung a mural over the doorway because the suggestion of the door was, hey, here's a door, let's go outside. That was the cue. By hanging a mural over the door, that suggestion was eliminated. Now, these are simple, but in some cases they are very functional. So familiarity is really important. And it's really important to people. So I've been in a lot of experiences where families wanted to move mom in. They wanted me to fix up the house to move mom in because they were unhappy that mom didn't recognize them last time they visited the nursing home, or the nursing home staff doesn't seem to be caring for them well. And I actually typically recommend against this because it is about this fear, loss, It's sometimes more about the person who's dealing with it than mom. In fact, in many cases, the experience, witnessing it can be worse than the experience for this person who's having dementia and is content on the island of their own mind. So that situation was going to, I think, with some clients, was going to lead to a family disaster, bringing mom into the house when she didn't know who she was and she needed a great deal of care, and how would care and time be doled out among family members. So I think these are really important things to consider. And let me tell you something else I have had a lot of experience with, which is that mom's doing okay, but we're going to move her before it gets too bad. Well, the move makes it too bad, because that loss of familiarity from the home she was in or dad was in, and the loss of routine is devastating to memory. So what little memory may have been available disappears when you make that move. And just consider this or be aware of it. I'm not saying that you don't need to make the move, but that it is often devastating to what's remaining. So my big question before I get to the end is, are the people who are active and engaged the lucky ones, or is it the chicken or the egg? Are the people who are active and engaged and do the dancing and have their physical and cognitive things going well and throughout life, are they the lucky ones who don't become demented because they were active? Or are those types of people the ones who are not so prone to dementia? And I don't think anyone knows the answer. But it's a really interesting question for me. And the last thing I want to talk about, back to my idea that the older brain is the better brain, the advantageous brain based on experience and capabilities. And that's to talk just a little bit about encore careers and the value of older people to our community. Multi-generational activities, tutoring, experienced and capable people who are asked to participate in community activities, whether it be with their experience. Now, don't ask somebody who was a doctor, lawyer, accountant, Indian chief to come in and stuff envelopes. Ask them to use their capabilities and their experience for the betterment of the community. And my guess is they're very interested in doing that. So we have a lot of experience and capability out there that I think too often we're not taking advantage of. We now have 20 years after retirement, whatever retirement was. And my friends who are in that are not retiring so much as picking up on new things. They're picking up on new things where they can have a purpose, where they can bring value to the programming and community activity. And the really important part about that, though, the difference between work and encore career seems to be about flexibility and scheduling. So I had a neighbor who was a very capable woman across the street from me when my children were young. And I called her occasionally to say, would you watch my kids? You know, one of those things where you just have to run out for an hour, and boy, wouldn't it be great not to have to schlep them with you. And she always said the same thing when I called, always exactly the same thing. She said, how often? And I always said, just for now. And she said, fine. She was always willing. She just didn't want any kind of regular gig. So I think that, you know, if you've got somebody who you have community activities and you can entice and engage older, experienced, valuable, capable people to join them, remember they take vacations, whether it's with family or travel or whatever, and allow that to be worked well into the schedule of your taking advantage of their value. I think this is part of what will make our community strong as we continue to age. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was some fantastic information. I heard a lot of words that we've heard when we've been working on the older person's policy about dignity and independence, people being valued, the assets to the community, and the importance of making sure that we all stay engaged. And so now it's your opportunity to be engaged and ask some questions, okay? We've got some microphones around the room. Any questions? Hands up. Got one down here, please.
This question is basically for the entire panel. My father struggled with Alzheimer's for probably 10 years, and he died 13 years ago. And he had very significant symptoms of paranoia and violence. He got moved around in Miami, I think it was 4 nursing homes, and ended up in a hospice care just because nobody really wanted to take care of him. He was banned, he was punching nurses and had to go to court and all sorts of stuff. And obviously he was ending up all over the place and wandering, and just thought that we were trying to kidnap him and got very violent most of the time. I'm wondering, what are people doing now, if you're aware of these types of nursing homes and these facilities, to deal with that kind of extremely violent and unpredictable behavior of patients with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Okay. It's open to anyone on the panel who'd like to take a response. No? Dr. D'Souza? Look like you're about to.
Part which you're describing, he seems to have had very advanced health. Best option for him would not be changing the nursing home frequently, because even the change of environment would itself cause him to have more of these attacks. But unfortunately, there's not much to do except medications where they would give antipsychotics, etc., to calm the patient down.
Anybody else on the panel want to add anything to that? No? No? Dr. Hospitalis, look like you're about to jump in.
I've seen absolutely unacceptable practices where they tie people down, and that still goes on.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Thank you very much. This was a very interesting presentation. My question relates to the dementia with Alzheimer's and what prevention can be taken on now so that, a few years down the road I don't develop that.
So it again comes down to just healthy living, where you control your vascular risk factors like blood pressure, hypertension, if you smoke, stop smoking, limited amount of alcohol intake, etc. It's basically just healthy living, eating right.
There's also other, so I agree with that, that's the main thing. There are other interesting things emerging, like learning a second language is quite protective. And the protective effect lasts for a very long time. So if you don't already know a second language, start learning one now.
Okay, we have a question. Oh, sorry, in the back first, and then we'll come up here.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. It was very enlightening. Can you tell what's the impact of sleep? How does it contribute to dementia, or does it contribute to dementia? The reason why I ask this question is because the generation is sleeping less hours before midnight, and I know that that has some impact on the brain.
The impact of sleep.
So again, the impact there would be they would have increased risk to hypertension, diabetes, etc., which indirectly will contribute to the dementia. So everything is related. You have to have a healthy lifestyle, and so sleep is also important.
Okay. We had a question. Oh, over here. Okay. Then we'll come.
Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was wonderful. My father had Alzheimer's and he died 2 years ago. And I have just read an amazing book called Where Memories Go by Sally Magnuson, whose father was the man who presented Mastermind on television. And it was his wife who died of it. And there's a new charity that she started called Playlist for Life, and it's about music, which is really helpful for people with Alzheimer's. And this charity provides the people with their choice of music on an iPad, which they can listen to, because music does seem to help people with Alzheimer's very much. And might be interesting for people to research that a bit, if they're, because Alzheimer's is so poorly understood and so poorly cared for. I've seen some, tying people down, giving them a lot of antipsychotics, and oh dear, dear, dear. It's really a situation that needs to be looked at much more than it is at the moment, and I'm so glad to have been able to hear the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody want to comment on the panel? No?
I agree with you in the music part. After my mom seemed to be unable to speak, certain kinds of music would have her singing and she would remember all the words, and we were astounded. And then we sort of stumbled upon the trick with music, and that was helpful.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious, what's the youngest dementia patient you've come across?
It again depends on the cause. So if anything below 60, we would call as young onset dementia. But a typical Alzheimer's patient, I would have seen at around 40. But he would have had a strong family history of Alzheimer's.
We have a question in the back first.
Hi, I actually just wanted to follow up a little bit on a couple of the comments that were said, particularly about music. I'm a music therapist, actually, and I do work with people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, and I just love what you said about the importance of music, and one part in particular, using music that is their preferred choice of music, which is exactly what we do as music therapists, as we go in and we get to know a patient and their family, and we work with them to find the music that speaks to them the most, because that's really what helps activate those memories. There's a lot of research about music in the brain, and just how music locks in memories from an early age, and how music at a certain time in your life is very prominent in your memory. And so I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, and also to tie it back to Taylor's question a little bit earlier about aggression. Music therapy can actually also be used as a treatment to help calm patients. We use it, trained music therapists can actually use music therapy to help lower the heart rate of patients who are very agitated and aggressive, to help lower their breathing rate and to help them relax, and also help ground them in reality so they are less agitated. So just a couple notes there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Up to the front.
Hi.
Sorry, I'll stand back so they can see
No,
you.
thank you. I just wanted to know what Cayman's was doing for Alzheimer's. I mean, it's a multi-approach problem, but for the young ones that are coming up, an important lifestyle is terribly important with diet, exercise, all that kind of stuff. Yet, you know, we have all these fast food restaurants around the place. It's just, you know, it's very hard for parents. They're busy. We'll just go get a burger for lunch. And these kids are more susceptible for obesity, ultimately going into Alzheimer's and everything else. Do we?
Yeah. Sorry, can I ask you to turn your phone off or silent in the front row, please? Thank you. I don't know if probably two of our panel members don't want to tackle that because it was a Cayman question. I don't know if you want to speak from some of the work that Adasi is doing in terms of education or assistance.
Yeah, so the society is actually trying to create awareness and detection at a younger age, where they are introducing screening programs in hospitals. So typically what we are doing is patients above 65, we are screening them for Alzheimer's. The question about lifestyle, it relates to all diseases, not just Alzheimer's. It relates to heart, the incidence of strokes, obesity. It affects everything, so it's not just about the Alzheimer's.
And I think it ties back to what Dr. McLaughlin was talking about last night in terms of our personal responsibility individually to collectively make the change. Certainly the message from the Ministry of Health and from our providers is we're trying to drive the message of prevention and embracing healthy lifestyles and making sure, you know, one of the changes that we made to the health insurance law in 2013 was to add a wellness benefit as one of the benefits in the minimum package to try, and because we realized, you know, we're telling people, get your pap smear, get your mammogram, get your annual checkups done, but the benefit wasn't in that basic package. So one of the changes in 2013 was to include that to make sure that people had that benefit. Now, one thing I don't know, I don't have the data on, is whether people are utilizing that benefit and whether we've seen an increase in preventative care. But certainly, and Dr. Hospitalis said last night, nobody has turned the tide on obesity. And I think that's a challenge that we need to look at, because it's linked to so many of these other CNCDs that have, we've talked about. They're contributing to the problem as part of it. But I think that, just to echo the challenge that Dr. McLaughlin issued last night, that we all need to decide what we are going to do, ask ourselves individually, what are we going to do to make that change? What steps are we going to take as individuals, both personally and professionally in the work that we do, to try and be part of the solution in making the change happen? It's a great question. Another question?
Yes, this is a comment. I have two of my cousins who have Alzheimer's. One of them developed it, actually, he was starting with it, and he was doing very well, and then when he learned of the death of his nephew, he totally went into complete, deterioration, and now he's a total vegetable in a matter of probably a week. The other thing was the other brother who already had Alzheimer's but never learned of the death of the nephew. His son goes every single day for the past 12 years and takes an hour every single day just telling him about his name, when he was born, his whole life for the past so many years. And you'll be surprised how when I went to see him after 2 years, this 2 weeks ago, he was able to carry on a conversation like you could never tell he has Alzheimer's, and it's in an advanced stage. But just the fact that his son goes every single day and dedicates an hour a day to recounting a part of what his life was and is still, it's an amazing, way to actually make him, be able to talk to people and even recognize people, which is very unusual. So maybe that's a type of therapy that, could help.
Well, I was going to mention, when we talk about music therapy and the comfort it brings to find music that you appreciate or from a period in your life, I attended a session at a conference a few years ago in which the people who had built a big apartment building of sort of what are now called greenhouse units, so 10 to 12 person living units, which are kind of home-like for people that are memory care. And what they found was that they interviewed the families of these people coming in and separated the people into lifestyle places, households that were lifestyle similar. So they had like two different religions, people who were in small business, people who were artsy, had always been in the arts, people who were academics, things like that. And they picked out, I think, 7 units. And there was this one woman these households shared a courtyard, which was a large space in the middle where they could go outside without going too far outside because it was inside. And what they did was that there was one woman that one of them was proper. This one woman who was in the proper unit kept breaking out and going and finding the artsy unit and feeling comfortable there. And so they re-interviewed her younger family members, and they said, yeah, I guess Dad was proper, and Mom had suppressed proper throughout her adult life. And then when Dad died and she got back to who she was, she wanted to be more comfortable with that. So I think it's one of the things to pay attention to is this issue of finding and helping the person be comfortable in who their core person, not maybe their recent person and not recent events, but their core person. A friend of mine just told me last week that her father lives near her brother who's an academic, and the father had been an academic. And the father now goes every day and sits with the son in his office and works on his research. And he has written the same paper or worked on the same paper for years already. He doesn't remember having done the work he did the day before, but he's very comfortable and happy doing the type of work he's always done because that's where he's comfortable.
That's great. Okay, we have a question here.
First of all, thank you all for a very enlightening topic. I know you said beware of herbals, but I wonder if any of you can comment on the use of coconut oil with dementia and Alzheimer's. You probably know that there's a pediatrician in, I don't know whether she was Florida or Atlanta, whose husband developed severe Alzheimer's in the at the age early 50s. And she did some research and found out that medium chain triglycerides were the things to use. So she went out and got coconut oil. She started him with, I think, 2 tablespoons daily, increasing, I think, up to a maximum of 8 tablespoons. And within a couple of months or so, by the time he went back for his testing, he was able to draw the clock, put the fingers on, put the time on correctly. Also, there seems to be evidence that in places like some of the Polynesian islands, where the coconut oil or coconuts are part of their staple diet, they seem to have a very, very reduced incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia. So I'm wondering if in this island where coconuts are prevalent, if maybe it might help to ward off dementia. Maybe is this thing something that people should be doing? I wonder if any of you can comment on that. Thank you.
I cannot comment specifically on the person you mentioned. There are a lot of populations that have more traditional lifestyles. Polynesia, there's just a new one reported in the mountains of Italy, where there's very low levels of Alzheimer's. But people have a healthier lifestyle. Very low levels of smoking, physically active, diet rich in polyunsaturates. So so that would suggest that your lifestyle and the environment in which you're living is a major determinant of dementia later on. Well, we know that. As to the specificity of coconut oil, I'm not sure. Yeah, but it certainly is subject, it could be investigated.
Okay, a question here?
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick questions on the demographics. I think the figure of 36.5 million people living with dementia was mentioned. Was that worldwide? Yeah. Okay. And then for Dr. Hospitalis, you had mentioned the projections for 2050. Were those projections based on the current populations that we have now, or are we importing our retirees and older people? Is that where the projections are coming from?
That's a good question. Most of it is based on our current populations and projected birth rates. It does include migration out and migration in to the Caribbean region. But we're not in, well, some countries, some islands might see a major effect from importing quote-unquote retirees or out-migration of the working age population, leaving a lot of elderly people behind. But the overall Caribbean, the drive the trend is an indigenous based on the populations we have now.
Thank you. It's been great. I want to ask you, there's one therapy that's been not mentioned. I'll mention it because I know of an Alzheimer's patient who's been greatly improved by massage therapy. She's been getting a massage like every other day, and it's made a tremendous difference. Where she couldn't, her cognitive brain was not working, the massage therapy somehow, I mean, she can recognize you now and have a decent conversation. And maybe it doesn't last that long, but anyway, so that's one thing I wanted to mention for people in here who are dealing with people with Alzheimer's. The second thing I wanted to ask was, what about Prevagen? I'll just leave that. I'll let you answer that. But the third thing I'm interested.
Sorry, what was that? What about what?
Prevagen, that new medicine they say helps memory that's made from jellyfish. Okay, leave that. The one I'm really interested in is the stem cell research. It's their stem cell research being done where there's certain areas of the brain that are failing the most, or from x-rays and whatnot, MRIs, that is any stem cell research being done in the brain for Alzheimer's.
Stem cell research is being done not only for Alzheimer's, but for Parkinson's, for strokes, for a lot of degenerative things, even post-traumatic. But till now, it is all just in a trial or research phase. None of it has actually shown any significant improvement to be clinically implemented. The medication you mentioned about, unfortunately, I don't know much about it because again, it's comes in the other branch of medicine which we don't deal with. So.
Is there any other questions for the panel? No? No? Everybody's going no? All right. Can I ask you please to give them another round of applause? I hope that you all found the discussion and the presentations this afternoon of interest. I hope you all learned a little something that maybe you didn't know before and had some questions answered. If you didn't have your questions answered and you have a burning question that you were too shy to ask, I'm sure these guys will hang around for a few minutes if you want to come up and ask them after we go. Just a reminder, if you're not joining us tomorrow, well, why not? But you should. But if you're not, don't forget to recycle your lanyard and your name badge at the registration desk on the way out. We will be here tomorrow at 8:15 with breakfast sponsored by the Ministry of Home Affairs, Health and Culture. That's our ministry. And Louis will be back. He's opening with his presentation on aging. Is it a book or a screenplay? Starting at 9 o'clock. And then we'll have Colin Higgs, who will be speaking on a new approach to increasing population physical activity. And our final presentation of the conference is going to be The Chapters of a Healthy Life, Change Your Chapter by Modifying Your Behavior by Dr. Barsoom, who's the president of Cleveland Clinic, Florida. And then Councillor Roy McTaggart will close out the conference. I hope you have all enjoyed the day. How's the day been for you guys? Yeah? Excellent. Thank you so much for toughing it out to the end. I know that we've covered a lot of ground today and there's probably a lot to digest, but I hope you all have a wonderful evening and I will look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Hey, Susie.